They said my great-grandfather's 80-year-old dam was an eyesore and a safety hazard, so they bulldozed it while I was at my daughter's wedding. I came home from Autumn's reception to find 80 years of hand-cut granite blocks reduced to rubble, muddy water rushing wild, and the smell of diesel fumes hanging thick in the mountain evening air. The controlled flow that had protected our valley since 1946 was destroyed in 4 hours by a woman who'd moved here from California barely 2 years ago. There she stood, Cordelia Blackthorne, on her pristine deck in Willowcrest Heights, sipping what looked like champagne as raw creek water flooded into her own subdivision's storm drains. An HOA notice was taped to my mailbox, $14,500 in unpaid infrastructure fees for a dam that existed decades before her precious neighborhood had been a developer's fever dream. Here's what they don't teach you in HOA President's School: water always wins. And I'm a retired Army Corps of Engineers veteran who's about to give it some very specific directions. Speech balloon: what would you have done if someone destroyed your family's legacy? Backhand index pointing down, comment where you're watching from, and share your own HOA horror story. Television: follow me for real stories about justice, community, and standing up to corruption. My name's Ezekiel Ironwood, Zeke to anyone who's earned the right to skip the formalities. I'm the third-generation owner of 15 acres my grandfather Jeremiah Ironwood carved out of the Colorado wilderness back when men solved problems with dynamite and determination instead of lawyers and homeowners associations. Jeremiah built our dam in 1946 with hand-cut granite blocks and old-school German engineering, no mortar, just precisely fitted stone that had been holding back seasonal floods for nearly 8 decades. Every spring you could hear the gentle trickle of controlled water over those worn stones, smell the damp rock mixed with wild mint along the banks, and feel the smooth texture of granite polished by decades of patient flow. When Jeremiah passed, I inherited more than property. I got his stubborn streak, and 23 years of Army Corps engineering experience. After 3 tours and a medical retirement, I was perfectly content living in our modest farmhouse, watching my daughter Autumn grow up where bullfrogs sang their evening concerts and sunlight filtered through the aspen branches like nature's own stained glass. Then the developers came. Willowcrest Estate sprouted around us in 1998 like mushrooms after a summer rain, cookie-cutter homes for people who thought rustic charm was something you bought at Pottery Barn. Our creek became their water feature. Our flood control became their eyesore. Most neighbors were decent folks. But every subdivision breeds a queen bee, and ours came with a California driver's license and the social skills of a particularly aggressive wasp. Enter Cordelia Blackthorne, former city planning assistant, current HOA president for 3 terms running, future migraine in designer boots. She drove a spotless white Tesla that never seemed to pick up road dust, maintained a yard so sterile it could double as an operating room, and had perfected the art of smiling while mentally calculating how much your backward local customs were costing her property value. The first shot came 2 months after Autumn's engagement. "Mr. Ironwood," she said, standing on my porch in jeans that probably cost more than my monthly disability check, "we need to discuss your property's integration with community standards." Integration, like I was defective software needing an update. "Ma'am," I replied, "my property was here before your community existed." She glanced around my porch, hand-carved posts Jeremiah had shaped himself, with the same expression she might reserve for roadkill. "That's precisely the problem." She produced a folder thick enough to stop bullets. "Your rustic infrastructure poses safety concerns. That dam especially, it creates liability exposure. And frankly, Mr. Ironwood, some residents find your lifestyle incompatible with our investment protection." My lifestyle, code for you people don't belong here. The scent of her expensive perfume couldn't mask the faint chemical tang of contempt. I offered compromise, regular inspections, minor maintenance, anything to keep peace. But Cordelia had that predatory glint people get when they've decided you're the nail and they're the hammer. Her first act of pettiness? She called Child Protective Services, claiming my property was unsafe for children because Autumn still visited with her fiancé's kids. Anonymous tip, of course, but the timing was surgical, right in the middle of wedding planning. The harassment campaign had begun, and Cordelia had just declared war on 4 generations of my family. But she miscalculated one thing about retired military engineers: we don't just build things to last. We build them to survive people exactly like her. 3 weeks after the CPS visit, thankfully closed when the social worker realized the claim was malicious, a certified letter arrived that made Cordelia's earlier harassment look like amateur hour: $14,500 in retroactive infrastructure fees for my 80-year-old dam. I read the legal gibberish twice, standing in my gravel driveway while the mail truck's diesel exhaust lingered like a toxic cloud of bureaucracy. The paper crinkled between my fingers as I processed the audacity. According to HOA consultant Brantley Blackthorne, yes, same last name, no coincidence, my dam was negatively impacting downstream water management systems and required immediate remediation assessment fees. The twisted logic was almost impressive. My dam, which had protected this land since before their subdivision existed, was now supposedly responsible for runoff problems created by houses built on a floodplain that should never have been developed. It was like blaming the lighthouse for the rocks. 30 days to pay or face remediation proceedings. Translation: pay up or we'll destroy your family heritage with the enthusiasm of a toddler wielding a sledgehammer. But Cordelia made her first big mistake. I'm not just a retired engineer. I'm a paranoid retired engineer who documents everything. A quick search on Mr. Brantley Blackthorne revealed what my old Corps buddies had drilled into me: always verify the license before you trust the expertise. Turns out this expert was licensed in Texas but practicing hydrology consulting in Colorado without state credentials. Back in my Corps days, we saw contractors pull that stunt constantly, operate just outside jurisdiction to dodge oversight. My sergeant used to say, always check the license before you salute the plan. That advice just saved me $14,500 and handed me a legal sledgehammer. My counterpunch was swift, surgical, and public. I filed complaints with the Colorado State Licensing Board for unlicensed practice, demanded itemized breakdowns of every so-called improvement the fees covered, and requested HOA budget transparency, at their monthly meeting in front of 60-plus residents who suddenly realized they'd been funding a personal vendetta. The smell of strong coffee during those late-night research sessions mixed with the satisfaction of watching Cordelia's airtight plan develop its first major leak. A simple license verification had just destroyed months of expensive legal groundwork. Sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones hiding in plain sight. Cordelia's reaction was predictably defensive, and spectacularly stupid. She fired off passive-aggressive emails about harassment of professional staff and scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting, conveniently excluding non-residents like me. Because nothing says we're totally legitimate like secret meetings and tantrums worthy of a reality TV villain. But the damage was done. And it was spreading, like water through a cracked foundation. Longtime residents such as Dalton Greystone, a retired high school teacher who'd lived here 30 years, started asking uncomfortable questions about why they were paying emergency assessments to fund legal battles they'd never voted on. Savannah Riverside, a widowed retiree on a fixed income, began showing up at my door with copies of suspicious HOA invoices and a growing suspicion she'd been played. The community fractured along predictable lines, newcomers clutching property value fears like life preservers, while old-timers quietly wondered when their neighborhood association had turned into something that would make organized crime families blush at the amateur corruption. Anonymous social media harassment ramped up, rumors about unstable veterans and dangerous dams. The digital equivalent of throwing spaghetti at the wall and praying for sauce to stick. Every morning, the crunch of my boots on gravel as I checked my mailbox reminded me this war was far from over. But now those footsteps carried the confidence of someone who'd landed the first real blow. Cordelia's response to my licensing board complaint arrived faster than a tax audit on lottery winners. Apparently, nothing motivates an HOA president quite like public humiliation in front of people who actually pay her salary. Enter Peton and Associates, the kind of aggressive real estate law firm that makes ambulance chasers look dignified by comparison. Their letterhead was thick enough to armor a tank, and their first certified notice hit my mailbox with all the subtlety of a freight train hauling bad news. The new claim: my dam created catastrophic liability exposure for the HOA, and unless I obtained professional liability insurance or agreed to immediate removal, remediation proceedings would begin. The envelope smelled of expensive cologne and pure desperation. Apparently, when your fake expert loses his license, the next move is to hire real lawyers to make the same fake arguments with fancier vocabulary. That's where my engineering background proved invaluable again. During my core years, I learned that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one screaming threats, it's the one quietly building a better mousetrap. So while Cordelia was carpet-bombing my mailbox with intimidation letters, I was doing what engineers do best: systematic problem-solving and meticulous documentation. The pressure campaign escalated with military efficiency. Daily certified letters arrived like clockwork, each one ratcheting up the legal language and compressing the deadlines. County inspectors began appearing at inconvenient hours, always responding to anonymous safety complaints that read suspiciously like Cordelia's greatest hits album. A concerned citizen letter landed in the local paper, full of overwrought prose about aging infrastructure dangers. It would have made a soap opera scriptwriter blush. Then, while sorting through that legal avalanche one evening, I found something that made my coffee taste like cold regret. Among the stack of invoices, one stood out like a flare. Cordelia's legal fees weren't coming from her own wallet, they were being paid through emergency assessments charged to every HOA resident, including the very people she claimed she was protecting from my dangerous dam. My neighbor, Dalton Greystone, confirmed the scam when he appeared at my door clutching his assessment notice like evidence from a crime scene. "Zeke," he said, his teacher's voice shaking with fury, "I've been paying legal fees to destroy your family's dam. When exactly did we vote for this woman's crusade?" The answer, of course, was never. Cordelia was operating like a dictator in a homeowner's crown, using community funds to finance her personal vendetta. In the Army, we had a technical term for officers who abused power for personal gain: future defendants. My counterattack involved strategic precision that would have made my old commanding officer proud. I contacted Marlo Chen, an environmental law attorney specializing in water rights cases, and, conveniently, someone with a professional grudge against HOA overreach. Together, we filed Freedom of Information Act requests for every county communication mentioning my property. I began documenting each HOA bylaw violation with the thoroughness of a man building a federal case, because that's exactly what it was becoming. The discoveries were explosive. The HOA had never properly incorporated authority over pre-existing properties like mine. Cordelia's orders had the same legal weight as a mall security guard trying to arrest a federal agent. Several board decisions violated Colorado's open meeting requirements, and her emergency assessments had all the legitimacy of counterfeit poker chips. From years dealing with government bureaucracy, I knew this much: organizations built on shaky authority crumble fast when someone shines a bright light on their paperwork. The community's response was swift and deeply satisfying. Dalton began attending every HOA meeting armed with pointed questions about financial transparency. Savannah Riverside, our soft-spoken widow on a fixed income, started organizing neighbors who'd quietly been paying for Cordelia's crusade. Evenings in my kitchen turned into strategy sessions, the smell of strong coffee mixing with quiet determination. We called ourselves concerned residents, but truthfully, we were forming a neighborhood resistance. Cordelia's desperation spiked when she issued a 48-hour emergency abatement notice, claiming a sudden inspection had revealed catastrophic structural deficiencies requiring immediate demolition. The timing was surgical, scheduled for autumn's wedding weekend, when she assumed family obligations would keep me distracted. But Cordelia didn't understand one thing about retired engineers: we plan for storms long before the clouds gather. That Saturday morning dawned crisp and bright over Summit County, the kind of perfect September day that makes you believe the world might still make sense. I was adjusting my dress uniform in the mirror, ready to walk my daughter down the aisle, when the low growl of heavy machinery shattered the calm like thunder in a cathedral. Diesel engines roared to life. Excavators growled beside the creek. I stepped onto the porch, still fastening my jacket, and saw them, a demolition crew positioned around my grandfather's dam like vultures over a carcass. Cordelia stood nearby in spotless hiking boots that had never seen dirt, clipboard in hand, directing the operation with chilling precision. "Emergency safety order," she called out, waving an official-looking document. "Structural inspection confirmed imminent collapse. We're protecting the community from your negligence, Mr. Ironwood." The operator of the nearest excavator looked uneasy. "Destroying someone's family legacy while the man's dressed for his daughter's wedding will do that." "Ma'am," I said evenly, though rage simmered beneath the surface. "I'm going to need to see that order and the inspection report that triggered it." Cordelia smiled, a cold, bureaucratic smile. "Community safety takes precedence over sentiment, Mr. Ironwood. This structure is a liability we can no longer tolerate." That's when my engineers I caught it, dates that didn't line up. The emergency inspection supposedly happened 3 weeks prior. The permit she brandished was an expired authorization from an unrelated drainage project months old. "Folks," I called to the growing crowd of wedding guests arriving early, "you might want to film this. Mrs. Blackthorne here is about to commit destruction of private property using fraudulent paperwork, during my daughter's wedding, no less." Her timing, meant to humiliate, had done the opposite. Among our 150 guests were a retired Judge Clarence Whitfield and Father Benedict Stone, a military chaplain, men who knew the difference between legal authority and criminal theater. The first hydraulic claw bit into granite that had weathered 79 mountain winters. The sound was like civilization itself cracking open. Clear water, once controlled and calm, surged wild, ripping soil, uprooting mint, flooding into the subdivision below like nature's own revenge. Within 2 hours, what had taken my grandfather months to build was rubble and chaos. We relocated the ceremony to the church basement. Autumn's white dress hem was streaked with creek mud, and 150 horrified guests became witnesses to what looked like deliberate vandalism disguised as governance. Judge Whitfield pulled me aside afterward, his voice grim. "Zeke, that wasn't legal demolition. That was fraud, maybe even federal. I hope you documented everything." Father Benedict placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes evil hides behind paperwork, son. But truth, like water, always finds its cracks." By nightfall, the irony was complete. Uncontrolled water from the destroyed dam began flooding HOA walking trails, turning their manicured parkways into muddy wastelands. Local news picked up the story by evening, footage of Cordelia in her designer jacket directing destruction while wedding guests stood stunned. Social media exploded, #JusticeForZeke, #HOA from Hell. Board members started pretending they barely knew her. The next morning, as I cleaned debris from the flood, a gust of mountain wind scattered water-stained documents across my property, financial records blown straight from Cordelia's deck. And those papers? They were about to change everything. Speech balloon: "What would you do if a neighbor destroyed your family's legacy during your daughter's wedding?" Backhand index pointing down: comment where you're reading from, and share the worst HOA power trip you've ever seen. The water damage documents scattered across my yard looked like confetti from a victory party in hell. I smoothed out each soggy page on my kitchen table, the same oak surface where 3 generations of Ironwoods had solved family problems, and realized Cordelia's flood had just delivered me a confession in her own handwriting. The musty smell of wet paper mixed with the bitter aroma of my coffee as I read. This wasn't about safety or liability. It was about covering up theft so audacious it would have impressed Wall Street villains. The first record hit me like cold water, an HOA bank statement showing the account nearly $970,000 in debt after a beautification project. That project had somehow turned community funds into a black hole deeper than Cordelia's conscience. Then came the invoices, dozens of them, addressed to Blackthorn Outdoor Designs, a landscaping company that existed only in Cordelia's imagination and bank account. $250,000 for maintenance that never happened. Another $100,000 in consulting fees for her husband's expertise. The timeline was obvious. For nearly 2 years she'd been draining community funds through shell companies and fake invoices, hiding the losses behind emergency assessments. And when residents began asking questions, she needed a catastrophe big enough to justify insurance payouts and mask the theft. Enter my grandfather's dam. Emails showed her conspiring with an insurance adjuster about catastrophic upstream failure and potential payout opportunities. The plan was perfect in its simplicity: destroy the dam, blame me for negligence, claim the floods damaged HOA common areas, and use the payout to fill the financial crater she'd dug. Cordelia hadn't demolished the dam out of fear. She'd done it to erase the evidence of her own embezzlement. From my years in the Corps, I knew a criminal pattern when I saw one. This wasn't incompetence, it was organized fraud. Offshore transfer logs to accounts in the Cayman Islands sealed the case. The HOA president who'd lectured me about community responsibility was running a small-scale cartel under the cover of property management. When I handed the files to Marlochen the next morning, she spread them across her conference table like evidence from a federal sting. "Zeke," she said, "this isn't just embezzlement. It's wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. The feds will fight over who gets this case." For the first time in months, I smiled. Good. Let them fight. We couldn't move too fast. If we exposed her publicly, she might destroy the rest of the evidence or vanish overseas. Timing mattered more than vengeance. That's when retired Judge Whitfield joined our little task force, bringing his federal contacts and a lifetime of experience putting crooks in orange jumpsuits. "We need her moving money, not just holding it," he said. "Catch her in the act, and she'll have nowhere to run." The irony made me laugh out loud. Cordelia had destroyed my family's dam to cover up her crimes, now her own flood was washing her into federal custody. Father Benedict joined the cause too, reaching out to investigative journalists he'd met during disaster relief missions. "Evil consumes itself," he said. "We just need to make sure everyone sees it happen." Our war room took shape around my kitchen table: Marlowe's legal pads, the judge's notes, Benedict's coffee, Dalton's spreadsheets, and Savannah's quiet determination. Every night the air filled with the smell of strong roast and the rustle of paper. Every document was scanned, every transaction traced. Dalton uncovered proof that the board had approved Cordelia's emergency assessments without a quorum. Savannah tracked cash transfers disguised as landscaping payments. Preston, a former board member who'd resigned in disgust, brought meeting minutes and hard drive backups he'd secretly saved. Marlowe drew the battle plan. We hit her on every front: criminal, civil, and administrative. When you're flanked from 6 directions, you can't run anywhere. Judge Whitfield lined up forensic accountants and FBI contacts ready to pounce once the financial patterns were confirmed. Marlowe filed for injunctions to freeze HOA assets. Father Benedict handled the community front, quietly educating residents about their rights under state transparency laws. By spring, Project Clean Water was in full motion. We weren't just fighting for a dam anymore. We were dismantling a criminal empire built on arrogance and HOA letterhead. Cordelia sensed the walls closing in. Security cameras sprouted around her mansion like mushrooms after rain. She stopped attending public meetings, sending proxies armed with scripted talking points. Transfers to her offshore accounts increased, exactly the pattern federal agents wanted to see. Our evidence archive grew heavier every night. Digital copies went to Marlowe's office under attorney-client privilege, the originals sat locked in Judge Whitfield's safe with full chain of custody logs. I'd spent my career designing flood controls. Now I was building one for justice, slow, relentless, and inevitable. Speech balloon. Have you ever watched karma show up with perfect timing? Backhand index pointing down. Comment if you've seen greed destroy itself, or share your own HOA horror story. Cordelia's discovery that her missing financial records had blown straight into enemy hands triggered a meltdown that made all her earlier tantrums look civilized. Her first move proved that panic destroys judgment faster than water erodes stone. At 2 in the morning, she broke into my property, searching for the documents she'd already lost. My trail cameras caught everything: Cordelia in designer yoga gear, flashlight in hand, stumbling through my garden like a clumsy burglar in a comedy skit. She tripped over my hose, cursed like a sailor, and kicked over one of my tool buckets before realizing she was being filmed. Watching the footage was both hilarious and tragic. There's nothing funny about watching someone desperate enough to risk prison over crimes they could have confessed to months ago. But she didn't stop there. Her online smear campaign exploded overnight. Fake social media accounts calling me a violent veteran, an unstable recluse, and a threat to public safety. She even sent anonymous letters to the local paper warning about militia activity near my creek. Then came the harassment calls, anonymous tips to the VA questioning my disability benefits. False reports to family services claiming my grandchildren were in danger when they visited. Someone even tried to challenge Autumn's marriage license, arguing the venue change made it invalid. Cordelia was spiraling, and every move dug her hole deeper. But fate, as it often does, had a wicked sense of humor. She hired a private investigator named Roland Grimm to dig up dirt on me and our conspiracy. What she didn't realize was that Roland Grimm was an FBI agent already investigating HOA financial crimes in Summit County. She had literally hired a federal agent to help build the case against herself. Sometimes justice doesn't need help, it just needs patience. Agent Grimm met me for coffee at Murphy's Cafe on Main Street, the same place my grandfather used to buy his morning paper. He smiled as he sipped his black coffee. She's been transferring money daily. Offshore accounts. Wire fraud across state lines. It's all there, Mr. Ironwood. You've built a better case than most agents. I just build things that hold under pressure, I told him. From that day on, the FBI became part of our kitchen table coalition. Every new move Cordelia made was logged, tracked, and handed straight to federal prosecutors. Still, I kept documenting. Every social post. Every complaint. Every false report. Every desperate act. The folder grew so thick it could stop a bullet. Then came the day Cordelia tried bribery. It was early afternoon, and the snowmelt had the creeks running high. She walked into Murphy's coffee house wearing sunglasses and arrogance, carrying an envelope like it was a business proposal. Mr. Ironwood, she began, sliding it across the table. Let's resolve this unpleasantness. $500,000, cash. You destroy the documents, and we both move on. I leaned back, staring at her with quiet amusement. You do realize this conversation is being recorded, right? She froze. What? Agent Grimm suggested I wear a recorder today. Said desperate people tend to incriminate themselves. Guess he was right. Her face went pale enough to match the snow outside. By the time she stormed out, she'd added 3 more federal crimes to her record: attempted bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to destroy evidence. Grimm's team loved the audio. He told me later it was the cleanest confession he'd ever heard. Meanwhile, Cordelia doubled down on paranoia. She withdrew HOA funds to pay for security upgrades and legal defense that didn't exist. She scheduled secret meetings with board members who were already cooperating with investigators. And she began moving large sums into new accounts that the FBI had quietly created as part of their sting operation. That's right, Cordelia was now depositing stolen money directly into federal accounts. Her panic was so complete it bordered on performance art. Every transaction. Every email. Every whisper. Recorded and traced. By early summer, Agent Grimm told me the case was airtight. They were just waiting for her to make one last mistake, one final act that would allow the arrest to be public, undeniable, and perfectly timed. And Cordelia, being who she was, didn't disappoint. Speech balloon ever seen someone so arrogant they hand-deliver their own arrest warrant? Backhand index pointing down comment with the wildest downfall story you've witnessed. Cordelia's last stand began with a propaganda campaign that was as loud as it was wrong. Overnight, the neighborhood was plastered with glossy flyers showing stock photos of frightened families beside headlines like, "Protect Willowcrest from Extremists." The text accused me of leading a dangerous veteran militia and spreading lies to destabilize community unity. It was absurd, half thriller novel, half gossip column, but it worked well enough to draw a crowd. She announced an emergency safety meeting at the flood-damaged community center, the same building her demolition had ruined. Her hired security detail, 3 off-duty officers who thought they were just protecting a concerned citizen, stood by the doors. They didn't know their client was hours from a federal indictment. Inside, folding chairs lined the mildew-stained walls. 200 residents filed in, newer ones clutching the flyers, long-timers carrying photos of the flood damage. News crews set up cameras. The air smelled of wet carpet and tension. Cordelia swept in wearing a tailored red suit, her smile stretched tight. Behind her was a PowerPoint titled, "Community Defense Initiative." "Good evening," she began, voice steady through the microphone. "We face an unprecedented threat from radical elements undermining our neighborhood. These agitators want to destroy the safety we've built." She gestured to a slide of my property, the empty creek bed where the dam had stood. "I personally authorized the removal of that unsafe structure because the welfare of Willowcrest comes before nostalgia." That one line was all the prosecutors needed, a public confession, broadcast live. I stood up slowly, microphone in hand. "Mrs. Blackthorne, thank you for admitting to the destruction of private property on camera. Now, shall we discuss the $970,000 in HOA debt and the shell companies you used to hide it?" The room went silent. You could hear the rain dripping through the damaged roof. "Those are lies," she shouted, eyes wild. "Security, remove him." Her guards hesitated, half the people in the front row were flashing federal badges. Agent Grimm stepped forward, calm as ever. "Mrs. Cordelia Blackthorne, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud." The handcuffs clicked like punctuation marks on a confession. Cameras rolled as she was led out past the residents she'd robbed. Some clapped, some cried. Within a week, the story was national news, HOA president arrested live during meeting. The rest of the board resigned, and the association collapsed under the weight of subpoenas. Cordelia pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence, 5 years in federal prison, complete asset forfeiture, and restitution to every homeowner. The total recovery hit $2.4 million, enough to rebuild what she had destroyed and fund veteran outreach programs in Summit County. We rebuilt the dam together, neighbors side by side, mixing my grandfather's old granite blocks with new ones. The water once again flowed clean and steady, just as he designed it to, proof that some things, if built right, can outlast greed. My daughter and her husband moved back into the farmhouse. Kids fish in the creek again. Each spring the town gathers there for the Freedom from HOA Festival, a reminder that ordinary people can stand up to corruption and win. I stand on the bank sometimes, listening to the water's calm voice against the stone, and I hear my grandfather's words echo back, "Build it to last, Zeke." Speech balloon. Have you ever seen justice come full circle? Backhand index pointing down. Share your own story of standing up to power, or the HOA that went too far.